Good afternoon and welcome to Indie Rising. I'm Rick Dumont on location here in Ringe, and I am the producer of the show, but today I'm on the road, and we are going to be talking with author Eric Stanway, who has written, 17 novels about various historical murders and hauntings. And we're standing right now in a place called the Ringe House, because that was one of the title of one of his books. And Eric has a storied history of having worked with Clive Barker on, graphic novels?
Night of the Living Dead, London. It's Night of the Living Dead, London. It was a graphic novel, yeah.
And also he's played in a punk band for many years and also worked in many newspapers as a graphic designer and paginator over the years. And now he is an author and very prolific. Eric, good to have you aboard. Welcome to Indie Rising.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us a little bit about the Ringe House here.
Well, the whole story starts back in 1817 when there was sort of a mini ice age in this area. And the price of oats, which is what pretty much everyone ate, went from 10 cents a bushel to $1 a bushel overnight. So a lot of people were forced off the land and they had to try and find work elsewhere. This particular area, this used to be the Pierce House. The Pierce House was a place where Isaac Pierce was working at that particular point. And this artist showed up one day, and he wanted to work on the property in trade for food and board. And basically, he worked really hard, but he didn't say anything about his life. So at one point, he came forward and he told the guy that he was an artist. And the house, which was over in that direction, was the whole front room was just whitewashed walls. So what he did was he offered to paint murals all over the walls for no money at all. And he did this for about 3 months, and then he completely disappeared. Nobody could find him.
No trace at all.
No trace at all. And what had happened was the farmer who was back here one day, a while after he disappeared, he was plowing the back 40, and he suddenly went through this hole, this tunnel in the ground. And he found that this tunnel led from the house right to the cemetery where we're standing right now. It's a 75-yard tunnel. And that was how he got out of the house. A while after that happened, two policemen from Boston came up, and they were looking for this guy. And it turned out that he had been an artist in Boston, and he'd had a fight over some woman, and the other guy had ended up busting his head open on an andiron during the fight. There was lots of blood. This guy figured he killed the guy, so he scooted as far as he could, and he made it as far as Ringe. The guy wasn't dead, though, and he sent out these detectives to try and find him and say, "It's fine, I'm not dead, everything's okay.
I'm not dead yet.
I'm not dead yet, it's cool." But they couldn't find him because he was gone. Now the weird part is, after all of this happened, exactly 1 year later, the next winter, the winter of 1818, the farmer was in his house and he heard something moving around out here. And he told his wife to stay in the house, and he grabbed his lantern and he grabbed his gun, and he ran out into the backyard around this area, and his wife's standing in the house, and she hears this horrible blood-curdling scream from outside, and she runs out and she finds her husband just lying on the ground, completely catatonic, with this horrible expression on his face. So she gets the carriage and she drives him down to the doctor's at the other end of town, and the doctor says, "I'm very sorry, madam, but your husband's dead. He died of shock. His heart exploded." And they came back to the house, and there was snow everywhere, but there was only 2 sets of footprints. There was the footprints of the wife and the footprints of the farmer, and nothing else.
So so the belief is that this area is haunted by some spirit, not necessarily a good spirit either.
There is some sort of malevolent spirit.
And this is the family plot?
This is the cemetery. As a matter of fact, afterwards, we can show you where the tunnel came out. But this is the family plot, and this is where the Pierce family buried all of their people.
Gotcha. So how did you get inspired to write this story or any of the stories that you do? I mean, they're pretty ancient, forgotten stories, I'm assuming, and you've done a lot of research.
Well, this particular story, it kind of fell in my lap because it was down over in Troy, and there's a junk shop called the Red Shed in Troy. And someone had taken this clipping from a 1934 edition of the Boston Herald, and they glued it to a big piece of cardboard. And they said, and it told the whole story about the Rinch house. And I figured, well, can't be that hard to find it, you know. No, it was that hard to find. I spent 3 months wandering around these woods, getting regularly harassed by the cops. And eventually I figured out where the place was. So that was where this came from. And that was actually the first book that pushed everything off from there. And I decided I was going to start doing these kind of books.
So what is it that drove you in the first place? Was it just finding that article that intrigued you? Or, I mean, how... Obviously, working with Clive Barker probably let a little bit into your the dark side of your mind, and of course the punk band Brain Trust, which was a pretty pretty popular band back in the day in the Boston area. But then all of a sudden becoming a writer of these novels, and they're historical fiction or nonfiction, correct?
Nonfiction, yeah, they are stories that actually are true, and I dig them up, and they're things people have forgotten about. And that's the appealing part. And yeah, they're all dark. They're not all ghost stories. Some of them are just straight up murders or lunatics. But
and all dealing with the Western New Hampshire, Western Mass, right?
all dealing. Well, I'm writing one now about New York, but apart from that, yeah, mainly around here. So.
Very interesting. Very, very interesting. We're going to be going to a second location that you have written about, the ghost chair.
Yeah.
Give us a little bit of a snippet before we hit the road for that.
With the ghost chair, it's an actual chair for ghosts to sit in, for real.
And have you seen ghosts there?
No, but I don't generally look for them. I just do the stories.
Interesting. Okay. Well, we'll see you at the next location.
The town line is, frankly. But this is the Phillips House Cemetery off the Jaffrey Road.
And important because behind us you can see a chair sitting amongst this family plot, which is also something that Eric wrote about. Tell us about that.
Well, this is the family plots of the Ross family who lived here throughout most of the late 18th and early 19th century. And old Jonas Ross basically held his family with an iron fist. They were terrified of the guy. And most of his children, hardly any of them got past 30 years old.
Yeah, we see that back here. There's 28, 21, 18, and 8 months and 9 months, I think, is the numbers.
Infants in there,
and of course, the parents lived till their 70s, which was very interesting.
Managed to hang on. But there was a lot of typhus around here at that point, too, so the mortality rate was very, very high. But Jonas Ross died in 1861, and a good 10 years after Jonas died, his niece came back to Jaffrey. She didn't live here anymore. She came back here, and she had this chair commissioned, which is cut out of what appears to be like a 7-ton hunk of solid granite. And it's a ghost chair. And the idea was that the ghosts of the family would be able to sit in the chair and look about on all of what would have been pasture land at that point.
Today you'll see it's all trees. We'll show you a cut in a second.
Yeah. So it's a very strange thing. I mean, it's actually for ghosts to sit in. How strange is that?
And you wrote about this in which book?
It's in Mysteries of Monadnock. Yeah. So which is all strange stories about this area. There's a lot of stuff.
So tell us again, Eric. I mean, you started with, back in the day, you worked with Clive Barker. Okay, which we all everybody knows Clive Barker's name as far as a horror. So would you say he's nuts?
He's nuts.
How did you get into that gig, and what kind of like spiral our way back around to?
Well, I used to draw for a company called Fancico, which came out of Albany, and they published a comic called Gore Shriek, and from that I was asked to collaborate on a 4-issue adaptation of Night of the Living Dead, which is one of my favorite movies. And from that, because that was so well received, we started to work on Night of the Living Dead London, and that was when they brought Clive Barker into the mix.
And was Romero involved in that too, or no?
Romero wasn't involved in the
That
sequel.
would be George Romero, by the way, for you non-knowers.
He did have final sign-offs on everything on the original Night of the Living Dead stuff, obviously, and so did Joe Russo. So, you know.
So then you got to work with Clive directly?
Over the phone, pretty much,
yeah.
yeah. And through the mail, things like
Because, I
that.
mean, you're talking London. I mean, you're obviously not American-born unless you spent a heck of a lot of time overseas in the UK.
Well, I've actually spent a heck of a lot of time in America, which is, lots of my relatives think I'm a dead Yank, but there you go. I've been here since the 60s.
Okay. So it's all right. So you worked with Clive, and in the 70s you formed a punk band, or in the 80s you formed a punk band called Brain Trust.
Brain Trust,
right?
yeah, which was referred to in the Boston Globe as an appalling noise.
Excellent. Just exactly the kind of review you want when you're a musician. Absolutely. Because no press is bad press.
Absolutely. And we disturbed a heck of a lot of people in Boston at that point. And then I drifted into newspapers and did newspapers for a while, and then I started writing books.
And that's where we met, was in the newspaper when we were Milford Cabinet. You were doing pagination and graphic design.
Pagination and graphic. I did that for years. I've worked in many newspapers. Yes.
Excellent. And you've done some reporting as well, some writing.
I write for the Telegram and Gazette and the Nashua Telegraph, Monadnock Table, you know, places like
So
that.
very versatile artist here. I mean, graphic designer, musician, author, reporter. What is it that, what the passion of all the different things you do, which would you say is the strongest passion?
I like to tell stories. And that's what people say about me. I'm a compulsive storyteller. And I don't know, most of the stories I tell, they're generally dark, because that's the way my brain works. It's just, you know, it's not like Fritz Weatherby where it's nice, homey, friendly stuff. There's always got to be a lunatic or a killing or a ghost or something in there, or else I'm not interested.
And has that always been the way since you were a child, or?
Yeah, I think I got drops on my head.
Nice, lovely indeed. But yeah, so you've written 17 novels.
17, I'm working on my 18th now.
And where do people find these books?
Mainly the Toadstool.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a big fan of pushing the Toadstool. They've been very, very good to me. They've been carrying a lot of my work pretty much since I started.
And they're a bookstore chain that are in Milford, Peterborough.
Yeah, Milford, Keene, and Peterborough.
Keating, okay.
Yeah.
And that's all in New Hampshire. But
They're all in New
they
Hampshire.
do have a web presence, so if
They
people
do have a
wanted
web
to look
presence. Yeah.
and there are other places that you can find it.
There
too,
are
as-
some
as,
places you can find
Amazon.
Yeah,
I mean, we have to mention it. I mean, it's
Yeah, you
you're
have
selling
to
your book, so you got to
mention
tell
it,
you
yeah,
where it is.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
commercialize it
Hi,
a little
Jeff.
bit. But so how is that going? I mean, and you're working on your 18th. What is that particular novel about?
This one is Bill the Butcher. If anybody's seen the movie Gangs of New York, they'll be familiar with the character played by Daniel Day-Lewis, which is a good movie, and there's no problem with Daniel Day-Lewis and Martin Scorsese, but he did mess brutally with the history. For one thing, he had him engaged in the 1863 draft riots, which was interesting as he'd been shot to death in a bar 8 years earlier. So
Oh, he's a ghost.
there you go. So it's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to tell the real story, which it isn't quite as over the top as what Scorsese did, but it has its own interest in its own way.
Definitely.
He wasn't that. The man could throw a knife and hit a target at 20 yards. I mean, he was a maniac.
Skill. So he's the kind of guy that every knife throwing person in a movie has been modeled after.
Yeah, he was also psychotic, but
Kind of goes without saying since you're writing about him.
yeah, basically.
And you self-publish,
Yes.
correct?
Yeah, they are the only book that isn't self-published. I did last year, Haunted Hillsborough County, which was picked up by the History Press.
Oh, nice.
But apart from that, I like to do my own stuff. I didn't even get to design my own cover with them, so I like to do my
And
own.
you design your own covers, of course. And we'll show you some of those as well. We'll interweave that into this interview segment. We'll show you some covers so you can get a feel for what Eric does as an artist as well as an author. So where do you go from here? I mean, are you looking to maybe get into a major publishing house, the Simon and Schusters of the world, or or
That'd be nice.
or
I
option them for screenplays.
that'd be nice too. I just really like doing my own dog and pony show, frankly,
Yeah.
because I'm a control freak. I like to have complete control.
It's just like all British people.
Yeah, no,
Not just kidding.
We can't help it.
That's why we revolted.
Yeah, you would. You were
Or
revolting.
we're revolting.
You were revolting, weren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, but yeah, you were saying you want to control the art and the message. And,
I like
and
to do the whole
the
thing.
marketing and all that.
Yeah, my books are very heavily illustrated, which means
You did all the illustrations, or
Oh,
are
no,
these
no,
historically?
they're historical source material that I dig up, and I try to push it as much as I can into the book. So the books are, I think, with the business with Kindles and all of that, it seems that books are just a way to impart information, and the Y books are more of an object. They're like a work of art.
Yeah.
So they've got like lots of illustrations in there and lots of they're a fancy thing. They're meant to be held. They're meant to be actually. They're
Like
very tactile.
Appreciated, like books
Yeah.
should be.
Yeah, not just the little glowy screen thing that you're playing with. It's not like that.
But can people read them on Kindles and whatever the other technological advanced book
don't know.
things are?
I try.
Sorry, I'm not verbose on it.
No, well, I tried to do one of my books on a Kindle thing once, but it's ended up Cuisinizing it into such a bloody mess that nobody. Stay away from the Kindle version of Madame Sherry. It's a mess. Do not buy it.
So of all the stories you've written, I mean, first of all, before I ask that question, when it comes to researching, I mean, you have to do a lot of research, I'm assuming, to get the accurate information. And you go into a lot of towns, a lot of historical societies, a lot of libraries.
Go through a lot of newspapers.
A lot of newspapers, which is your forte.
Yeah.
How long does it take to pen one of these tomes? I mean,
That's a good question.
an average.
Well, if everything slips into place, about 2 or 3 months.
That's it.
Yeah.
And these are 100+ page, 200-page books.
Yeah. Bill
Wow.
the Butcher's going to be over 300 pages by the time I'm finished.
And you are quite prolific.
Well,
I mean,
it's because I'm trained as a newspaper writer. When you're writing for newspapers, you got to move your stuff, you got to get it in, you got to turn around the copy, and these are habits that just never quite went away.
and they come in handy.
They do. Yeah.
I lost the question I was going to ask. You, of course, right? I got it. The of all your books that you've written, what is the most dear to you, or the most fascinating story that you've had to write about, or that you have chosen to write about, not had to write about?
That's like asking who's your favorite child. We
want to know.
The one that everybody else seems to like more than anything else. The one that made the most impact was about Madame Cherie, who was a crazy woman who lived out in West Chesterfield from the 1930s to the 1960s.
And this is New Hampshire.
West
correct?
Chesterfield, New Hampshire, yeah. She was a costume designer for Ziegfeld in New York in the 1920s. Her husband died of untreated syphilis in 1924, and she started partying with this guy Jack Henderson up in West Chesterfield, and she liked the place so much that she decided to move up there. She bought 400 acres on the side of Rattlesnake Mountain and built a massive castle up there where she'd bring in all these Broadway types who would have massive parties there till 4 in the morning. And if you know anything about West Chesterfield, it is the quietest place on the planet. It is not a party town.
And you can't get there from here.
Yeah, it's dead quiet. And eventually the money ran out, and she had to move out of the house. The house became abandoned, burned down in '62, and all that was left was the infrastructure, which was all stone.
So what is it about Madame Cherie that makes it a interesting read? I mean, you mentioned her being slightly out of her mind,
Yeah.
but what was the impetus on this story?
Well, she was totally loopy, and she was something of a local legend. And everyone in town knew about Madame Cherie. She'd drive around town in a 1925 Packard with those painted cream with bright red wheels. She would go into town and she'd wear a fur coat with not a stitch on underneath, and she'd like pull it open and pull bills out of a cleavage to pay people for groceries. She had a pet monkey on a leash.
So you don't just write about murders and ghosts. You write about eccentricities of humanity as well.
But this book really surprised me because when I started working on it, I had no idea how it would be received at all. And suddenly people went ape over it. They loved it. Excellent. You know, it took right off. So I was like, that's what everyone else likes at any rate.
So we got to find some more of those crazy people for you.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's why I'm doing Bill the
creative,
Butcher.
I should say creative people,
that's
eccentric
why I'm doing Bill
people.
the Butcher, because he's crazy as hell.
You know, that's just out of his mind.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's fascinating. I mean, you know, we wish you all the best, Eric. And again, you can find him on, do you have a website?
No, I still got to work on it.
Okay, so still working on a website, but if you go to the Toadstool Bookstore's website and also Amazon.com, you can find Eric's books. And you can also see him. He does a lot of book tours, a lot of book signings in and around the Western New Hampshire, Western Mass. I know you were just in Gardner the other day.
Sold that out.
Which is fantastic. I wrote a story about a very large haunted house over there in Gardner.
Yeah, the Sylvester K. Pierce house. They call it the Victorian. Oh, it's on the market, by the way.
So if anybody wants to buy a haunted house, it's available. Awesome, Eric. I appreciate it, and thank you for coming on Indie Rising, and best of luck to you, dude.
Thanks for having me, Rick.
Always a pleasure.
They say that New Englanders are a no-nonsense breed. Not focus on their wants so much.